We've already heard from Ruth Sirman. Once again, she's a veteran, workplace conflict management specialist with extensive experience in leadership, mediation, training, intervening in complex multi-party disputes, workplace assessments, arbitration. Oops, excuse me, I'm sorry. That's the one you didn't do. Right? I remember that. Conflict coaching and critical incident stress debriefing. And so without further ado, I'll let her get started today. Thank you, Ruth.
It's a pleasure to be back up here. It's been an interesting week, hasn't it? Yes. What I had talked with Ralph about doing this session on is a diagnostic tool that I use all the time when I find myself dealing with groups of people. Because if you think about it, have you ever noticed that the whole world does not necessarily approach life the same way you do? And how often have you walked away from situations going, what is wrong with that idiot? And why, in heaven's name, would anyone say that, do that, think that, be that, whatever? Have you ever noticed that there is a bit of a tendency? The tendency increases if they've just cut you off on the highway. Because typically what goes through your mind at that point is not even polite. But what I wanted to do was share this tool with you. So just before I start, this is not a personality profiling type tool, you know, like Myers-Briggs or whatever. There are aspects of it that are similar to some of that. But this is more about the priorities and intentions that we have as human beings. And we all have all of them. We just pick and choose which ones we're going to use depending on the circumstances that we're involved in. Does that make sense? And some of us have a stronger tendency to live in one area than we might in some of the others. So have you ever met somebody who's solution focused? They are on a mission, and they are going, and they're driven by results. The whole world is not like that. And there may be times when I'm driven by results, but there may also be other times when I'm driven by something else. So what we want to do today is take a look at the challenges that we run into when we get into those kinds of situations. And I absolutely love this quote. Please grant me the senility to forget the people I never liked, the good fortune to run into the ones that I do, and the eyesight to be able to tell the difference from a distance. Thought it was a rather interesting sort of spin on another more famous quote that people might be more familiar with. So what makes somebody difficult in our world? What's your experience? What makes somebody difficult?
They don't listen to others.
Okay, they don't listen. What else?
Inability to consider other perspectives or other options.
Okay, inability to consider other perspectives or other options. Vincent?
Background.
Sorry?
Their background.
Their background, okay?
Then the unique experience of a person.
My unique experience or
That person's unique experience.
that person's unique experience? Yes, okay. Anybody else? What makes somebody difficult? Roger?
My perception is that they don't hear or validate.
They don't hear or validate, okay?
I like using the old phrase, my way or the highway.
It's my way or the highway? Yeah? Anybody else? Myron?
Physical difficulties.
Physical difficulties, okay? Anything else that makes someone difficult for you?
Perception.
Perceptions, absolutely. Perceptions of what they want, perceptions of why they're doing what they're doing, perceptions of what they did, and a whole lot of other perceptions as well. We seem to live in a world of perceptions, it would seem. Okay, so some of the things that I came up with, typically if you are unpredictable to me, it will be harder for me to know where you're going to come from, and I'm more likely to react negatively. If I feel that you are entrenched, you're stuck, and you're not willing to move, then what you'll see is people going, well, I don't know what's wrong with him or her, And we have a very strong tendency to put, to want to give that other person all of the credit for whatever the challenges are. Have you noticed that? Not only do we want to give them some of the credit, most of us would like to give them all of the credit. So it's all their fault. If only they would be different, then everything would be so much easier. Any kind of resistance to something that we feel passionate about or that we feel would be beneficial or useful can move somebody into that camp of being perceived as being difficult. And anybody here ever had their buttons pushed? You know, people say or do things that just make you want to react. What are the kinds of things that people would do that would push your buttons?
If you know what I mean.
If you know what I mean.
That's what it is. That's what the.
If you know what I mean, yeah.
If you know what I mean, that was the phrase.
That was the phrase. Do you don't remember?
No, it just was my butt.
Trust me, yeah. Okay, so specific things that people would say or do. Any others? Specific things that would actually push your buttons.
Now listen to me.
Now listen to me. One of my kids came out with one at one point. I think the reaction they got might have been a little more dramatic than what they were expecting. I think at the time they were about 13. Talk to the hand, because the face ain't listening. I only ever heard it once. Now I understand from others that the latest version of that is talk to the elbow because it's not worth the effort to put out the hand. Yeah, that would definitely, most parents might react to that one. The other one that I recall, and I have 4 kids, so you learn very, very quickly when you have children what pushes your buttons. But sometimes you don't actually recognize it. So I'm at the kitchen sink cooking lunch one day, and my daughter, who at the time was in kindergarten, so she would have been 5, was coming up from the bus with a friend of hers who had come for the afternoon. And as they walked past the open window, I heard this little guy say to my daughter, "What can you do at your house?" So he's looking for the rules, right? And my daughter's response was, "You can do pretty much anything, but don't tell lies and don't say yuck." The lying one I would have agreed with. I had never realized that my reaction when somebody would come in and say, "What's for dinner?" and I would tell them and they would go, "Yuck." I didn't realize that my reaction was quite as dramatic as what they had picked up. So other people are frequently more aware of what pushes your buttons than you may be, because certainly it was for me. So in that sense, part of the challenge around dealing with difficult behavior is that we may not necessarily recognize when our own buttons are being pushed. Now the other piece to this is that we have a tendency as human beings to focus on what's happening at the time. We're event focused. We were in a staff meeting and this is what was said. I was out with my family and this is what happened. And we tend to cling to what went on at the event level. Now the challenge is, and certainly if you're working with groups in the session that I did the other day on mediating large complex problems, when you're working with groups, there are some things to keep in mind. And one of them is the number of relationships or possible relationships that go on. So if Tim and I are in a conversation, how many relationships are there in that conversation? 2, right? My relationship with Tim, Tim's relationship with me. Now if we add Susan? If we add Susan into the mix, how many possible relationships? Didn't know you had to do math today, did you? 6. Okay. Now, add Roger in. 16, right? Add in Shirley. It's exponential growth, absolutely, Vincent. It is exponential growth. If you have 100 people in a mediation, how many possible relationships do you have?
You now have added a difficult person into that.
Doesn't matter. Well, I mean, there's bound to be difficult people, but how many possible relationships?
Wouldn't it? 100 times 100.
So 10,000.
Almost infinite.
10,000 possible relationships because it is an exponential growth curve. So if you think about the potential for there to be issues that you are unaware of if you're mediating complex, large group conflicts, even with, say, 5 people, you've got 25 possible relationships. Don't forget that. So the most obvious ones are the most verbal and the most visible. But what about what's going on behind the scenes? The person who's going, oh, did you see what he did? But it's happening in the parking lot. So it doesn't come out in the mediation. It doesn't come out in the interviews. There's all this stuff going on in the background. You want to know what's going on there. And so I find this particular visual helps me to keep that in mind. There are events. Who said what, who was there, what happened in the staff meeting or at the family dinner or whatever it was. But then underneath that, especially with people who are together over a period of time, so people that you work with, people in your family, people in your community, people who are in your support network, your friend group, you will have patterns of interactions. It's like we have a dance that goes on in the relationship, and that dance becomes very predictable. I used to do divorce mediation years ago. I haven't done it in years, and I don't think I'll ever do it again because it's not my area of interest, and it's definitely not my area of expertise, because in Canada you need specific legal expertise in order to do it, and I've never gone and got that. So I don't do it anymore, but I can recall talking with a couple at one point who were looking to come up with a mediated separation agreement. And they definitely had issues with each other. Most people who are getting divorced do. And at one point I said to them, so I'm curious, how often does this same fight go on? And they went, what? I said, yeah, like, could you record the fight, and then from now on, instead of actually having it in person, could you just put 2 tape recorders on the kitchen table, hit play, and go for a beer? And they looked at me and they went, actually, much as we hate to say it, yeah. Because we have a tendency to have a pattern in how we fight. Now, everybody has what I would call a default conflict blueprint. It is our approach to how we deal with conflict. And so we've evolved that over the course of our lifetime in the same way that we have a default financial blueprint. Are you a saver? Are you a spender? Would you go into debt? What's your risk blueprint? Because the financial one and the risk one often go hand in hand. Food. We have food blueprints. Think back to when you were a child. What did your parents say to you at the dinner table about food when you were eating? Eat everything on your plate. Finish your food.
People starving.
There are people starving in, fill in whatever blank. My mother used Armenia at one point, and then there was another country. And I kept saying to her, well, please, could you just send it to them? Especially the canned peas, because I absolutely could not gag those down. I still can't. But, you know, in that sense, I grew up with an expectation that if you took it, you would eat it. So especially at things like potluck dinners, you did not waste food. And so if it was on your plate, then it was inappropriate to throw it out. So when I'm at the dinner table now, even if I'm stuffed, my default blueprint says, keep going, you're not done yet. So then you look at
more space.
you look at how healthy I am, and yeah, I mean, it's a big fight for me in my head to walk away from food. I do it much better now than I used to. But if you think about it, that's the power of these default blueprints that we have. And our default conflict blueprint is no different. If we had more time, we'd go into sort of where it came from and how it influences our success in dealing with conflicts and when does it get in our way? Because typically they do. So people who are chronic avoiders, and as a mediator you may occasionally run into people who are chronic avoiders. They don't want to engage. They don't like conflict. And in their world it's better to leave than it is to risk getting involved in trying to sort it out. So trying to get them to actually show up for mediation is going to be a major challenge. Then you've got the my way or the highway approach that says, you know what, just sit down, shut up, and listen. I'm going to tell you how we're going to resolve this. And it's quick, it's simple, and it's easy. And I actually had a client, this was back when I was doing divorce mediation, who walked in with a sheaf of papers about an inch thick, walked in and went, there, I've spent all weekend working on this. That's how we're going to solve this problem. All you have to do is sign it. And we're done. Now, what do you expect that the reaction of the other party was? Actually, it involved something about dead bodies. Over my dead body, am I going to sign that? And he couldn't get it. He could not understand why she would resist all of the effort that he had put into putting this together. It was an interesting mediation. But in that sense, that default blueprint has a huge influence over how we show up when we're involved in things. And that's part of the pattern that you'll see. So as a mediator, you don't ever want to get stuck at the events. The events are symptoms. What we're looking to do is leverage those conflict symptoms into understanding more of what's going on below the waterline. So we want to start watching for the patterns. You're going to hear the stories from all of the parties that are involved. Now, if they're only party A, party B, and party A decides they don't want to tell you about something, and if party B is unaware of it, you may never find out about it. But let me tell you, if you've got 344 upset people in a mediation, I can guarantee you somebody has heard about whatever it is party A doesn't want you to know about, and it will come out. So it's much harder in a group for people to suppress things that happened or whatever, because they will have told somebody, somebody else will have seen it, somebody else would have kind of gone, yeah, you know what, this is not adding up. And they start putting 2 and 2 together and getting 4. So chances are it will show up. The patterns come out in the interviews where you're hearing the same thing, or you're hearing about the same thing, but everything that you hear has a different spin to it, so that you've got a pattern where people are not necessarily seeing the bigger picture. They're not willing to take accountability for their own role in the situation, for instance. You've got a pattern of management minimizing things. Whatever it is, it will show up as a pattern. Because underneath the pattern, you've got a system that is operating, and your system is whatever your group is. And it may be bigger than the group that you have. There are often systems nested within systems. Does that make sense to people? Are people familiar with systems? Think a human body. You have a digestive system, a muscular system, a neurological system, a skeletal system, an endocrine system, a lymphatic system. Could keep going, right? All nested within one organism that actually works together and allows me to stand here and do whatever I want to do and stand here and talk to you. All those systems work together. It's the same with organizations. They have systems within systems within systems within systems as well. So you want to know, what are the structures, what are the forces, what are what's the dynamic complexity that you're dealing with, because systems are never static. You can't take a snapshot of a system and go, I got it. We have a tendency to do that just because it's simple. But the reality is, the minute you've clicked the shutter, what's happened to the system? It's easier sometimes to keep that in mind, because a dance is not static either. And a conflict is very much like a dance in that there is always a dance floor. It may be the whole organization, it may be the family, it may just be the 2 parties, it could be the entire community, or it could be a global one. But there is always a dance floor. There's always music. The music of the system you want to listen to. Where's the noise? Where's the distraction? We were talking about that on Thursday. Where are things calm? Where are they not? Those are the kinds of system things that you want to understand. But underlying it all are the mental models that we have and that the group has. So a mental model is the filter that I use to assess what's right, what's wrong, what's fair, what's unfair, what's inappropriate, what's appropriate, what's professional, what's unprofessional. All of that goes through a set of filters that I have in my head. And it contributes to the story. Remember the slide with all the arrows? It contributes to the story that we tell. Organizations also have mental models. They have filters as well as to what's appropriate in this organization. You know, if you think about when you started a new job, first thing you want to learn, what should you do and what should you not do in this organization? Interesting question to ask people. What are the unwritten rules in this organization or in this relationship? I was dating a guy at one point, and I actually broke up when I realized was that one of the unwritten rules was that he could initiate things, but I could not. And it was like, really? Guess how long that's going to last?
Until you initiate the breakup.
Exactly, until I initiated the breakup. Yeah, and he was quite stunned. He looked at me and said, I don't understand why you're upset. I said, okay, so because I kayak a lot, we were out kayaking. He splashed me with water. Thought it was hilariously funny. But when I splashed him back, he got angry. Can't do that. I said, well, you started it. You know, like, it's kind of like if you can't stand the heat, don't stay in the kitchen, kind of thing. And he says, yeah, but I hate being splashed with water. Then why would you splash me? Anyhow, we had interesting discussions about it. But those mental models are very, very powerful. And if you want to change something, you've got to work at that level of the mental models. You can't change someone's behavior and so on if their filters have stayed the same. It's a little bit like deciding you've got an apple tree in your backyard, but you really don't like apples, you want pears. So you go out and hang pears on the apple tree and now say, okay, now it's a pear tree. No, it's not. It's an apple tree with pears hanging on it. If you want to change it to a pear tree, you're going to have to do what? You're going to have to graft a pear tree onto the roots and let it grow. So there's a big difference between trying to change things at the event level and trying to change things at the root level. So when you're talking about getting to root causes, that's what you're frequently looking at as you go down through the layers of that onion, is what are the mental models that are operating here? And it's not just the individual ones, it's also the organizational or the group ones. Families will have an organizational culture in the same way. It's how that family does things. So this slide you saw on Thursday, for those of you who are here, I put it back in because some people weren't here. But essentially, this is how we create the stories about what's going on in a situation. Something happens, that's the events. We put an interpretation on it, we process what's going on, and using our mental models and the patterns and the history of whatever's gone on, we're going to create a story about what's happened. That story then influences the decisions that we make about how we're going to respond to things. And then we do it. We either act or react, which may be doing nothing. The part that we get at where we get ourselves into trouble is that then our actions, our choices, become data for everybody else in the situation to observe. We have a tendency to ignore that part. So we take that part out of the equation as individuals. When you have people coming in saying, then they did this, and then they did this, and then you're not going to believe it, but then they did this, and then they did this. What's missing?
What did I do?
What did I do? Right? So he made that comment in meeting, and I got angry. And when I got angry, I spoke out. And then he got more angry, is a much more realistic approach to the situation than he got angry for absolutely no reason. I don't know why he was mad. And then he just kept getting angrier and angrier and angrier and angrier. That makes no sense. But it also gives you a clue as to how able this individual is to see their own role in the situation. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so 3 sides to every story, yours, mine, and what really happened. And part of this, part of the stories that we tell ourselves includes our priorities and our intentions. Now, the challenge is that I can whitewash my own intentions to the nth degree. I was just trying to help. I was just saying what needed to be said. If I hadn't done it, nobody would have. And we get the halo out and we polish it up and we justify and rationalize everything that we have chosen to do. And so now all of a sudden we're golden, and what's everybody else? Wrong. Absolutely. So part of the challenge is that while you're doing that, what am I doing?
Nothing.
Same thing. I'm polishing up my story and my halo. And so you get people who are butting heads because their stories are very different and incompatible. And so when people start in with their stories, you'll hear things like, well, that's not what happened. Well, you know, listen, this is my favorite. I was there. What I'm telling you is the truth. And anyone who tells you any different is what? Either wrong or out of their mind or lying, right?
If you know what I mean.
If you know what I mean, yes.
Is that the same idea of like when someone has an accident and there were 5 eyewitnesses and you get 5 different stories?
Because we choose selectively what data we hang on to and what data we either ignore or let go of, or miss. We may legitimately have not even seen stuff. There was a hilarious video at one point where they painted a car so half of it was white and the other half was black, or half of it was red and the other half was blue, or something like that. And then they crashed it, and they asked people in a group interview what had happened. Well, the people who were on that side of the street said it was a blue car, and the people who were on this side of the street said it was a red car, or a black car and a white car, whatever it was. And they asked them to try and sort it out so that they could come up with one story. And it was absolutely hilarious watching how adamant people were about what they had legitimately seen. But nobody clued in that the car was 2 different colors. We did this actually in a leadership course that we were teaching a few years ago on the ocean in kayaks. So 14th and 15th of November in Nova Scotia, for anyone who knows Eastern Canada, has the potential to have some rather nasty weather. Because it's borderline winter. We lucked in. We had sunny, reasonably warm conditions. But we had 25 CEOs and senior leaders from organizations that we put in kayaks for 2 days on the ocean. Now, anybody here ever gone kayaking? Absolutely. But what is it about being on the ocean that takes people out of their comfort zone? Exactly. You have swells, you have waves. Most of us don't live in kayaks. And I think there was 1 person out of the 25 who'd ever been in a kayak before. So we've taken these very senior folks who are used to being in control, and we've put them in an environment which is inherently unpredictable, somewhat unstable, at least in their mind, and out of their comfort zone for sure. Now, their only task the first morning was that they needed, as a group, to paddle from where we launched to where we were having lunch. So we were going from the boathouse out to Mars Island. It's a reasonably straightforward paddle. It's a very safe paddle. It's in behind a lot of islands. There's not a lot of waves or currents. You do get tide, but not a lot of serious conditions that you need to be concerned about. And we had 5 guides who were there for safety purposes. And then there were several of us who were also guides, but who were leading the course. So I mean, the ratio was about 1 to 2, which is actually pretty good. What they didn't know was that we had given them all maps. Everybody knew that. What they didn't know was that some of them had marine charts, some of them had topographical maps, and 3 of them had a highway map. But they didn't know that. We just handed them a waterproof bag with a map in it and said, you'll need this so that you can navigate. But you need to create a plan for how you're going to get from here to Mars Island. As you can imagine, the discussion got really interesting because people would say, well, we need to go to the buoy. And at the buoy, we need to turn left. And somebody would be saying, buoy, what buoy? I don't see a buoy. But nobody actually looked at anybody else's map. It wasn't until after lunch that they realized they all had different maps. And actually, we even gave 2 of them maps that weren't of the area. Just thought we'd mix it up a little. We gave them maps of Quebec.
So angry.
Yeah, we had a few of those. But, you know, in that sense, everybody had a story about what was going on. And after lunch, we debriefed the stories, and it became very, very interesting to see what story people had come up with about the other people in the group. So, intentions, we talked about this the other day. I judge myself by my intentions, and I can rationalize those to the nth degree, but I will judge you based on the impact your actions or behavior have on me. And so, to that end, just to play with this for a minute, let's say my partner and I are getting dressed to go out for dinner on a Friday night. As we're getting dressed, I say to him, you know, I don't understand it, honey. I have been trying to lose this 20 pounds for the last 4 months. 4 months. I've lost 4 pounds in 4 months. I don't get it. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Now, fast forward, we're out for dinner with friends. We're having a lovely meal. At the end of the meal, the hostess comes out and she has this beautiful homemade blueberry pie. It's still warm out of the oven. And she says, oh, would you like ice cream with this? And I go, oh, warm blueberry pie and ice cream, that is absolutely my favorite dessert. And my partner goes, honey, why do you laugh?
We know what he's going to say.
Don't you think you should lay off the ice cream? Now, fast forward to the car trip on the way home. What's going on in the car?
Barrage.
A barrage. Okay, what does the barrage sound like, Derry?
Oh, you know, why are you doing that? And I thought you wanted to do this, and you know, it's about judging.
It's about judging. Can you actually do it as if you were the wife?
Oh, I don't want to go there.
Okay, anybody else? What else might be going on in the car?
Well, the man, your partner, is thinking that he was trying to help you.
He was trying to be helpful.
And he's wanting you to judge him by his intention.
But judge him by his intentions? Okay.
Trying to be helpful.
What's actually going on in the car? What's being said or not said?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Not a word.
Okay, and how would you describe that silence, Tim?
Deafening.
Deafening silence. Put a temperature on it.
Sub-zero.
Sub-zero deafening silence.
It's not being said. It's people not taking responsibility for their own behavior and expecting other people, especially those closest to them,
Okay.
to be a mirror for them.
Can I play wife for a second?
Sure.
You son of a bitch, how dare you try and tell me what to eat at the dinner table in front of all these people? I'll eat what I want to eat.
Okay. So that would be the barrage, perhaps?
Right.
Okay. Any other possibilities of what might be going on in the car? Because this is also an exercise to get out of just sort of the anticipated reaction. And what are all of the options that might be going on? Yeah.
Another one might be, thank you, honey, for watching my weight.
Thank you, honey, for helping me to watch my weight.
And
Yes.
thinking of me.
And for thinking of me. Yes. Oh, you. Oh, okay.
When she
There.
says that, you have to come back with, are the sheets in the guest room clean?
Are the sheets in the guest room clean?
Because I know
Might
that's
have
where
her
I'm
own
staying.
self-recrimination going on. You know, I really don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I can't control myself.
So she could have a whole dialogue going on within herself. Any other possibilities of what might be going on in the car or on the trip home?
Yeah, he could have said, you know, I'm sorry you're mad at me. I thought I was just trying to help because you had said earlier.
He could be apologizing. And saying, I was just trying to help.
He should.
He should be apologizing. Anybody else? Start thinking, because there's a whole bunch of other options that might be going on in this car. Somebody said, what do you mean conversation? There's no conversation going on in the car because there's only one person in the car. He's on a 25-foot rope with a 4-inch piece of duct tape behind the car. He's saying, it's okay, honey, it's okay. We'll go to Dairy Queen. I mean, there's a whole range of possibilities. But if you think about it, the two most likely ones are the barrage and the deafening silence. So the barrage, I can't believe you said that in front of all those people. I've never been so humiliated and embarrassed in all my life. And his response is, but honey, I was just trying to help. So the fact that I get hurt does not automatically mean the other person's intention was to hurt me. Unpacking intent and impact is one of the biggest challenges for a mediator to do because it is one of the biggest escalators of conflict. I judge you by the impact your actions or behavior have on me or the impact I think they're going to have. How many people in the grand scheme of the world do that? A significant, and it's something that it takes us milliseconds to go there, and even when the intention is clarified, how hard is it for people to step back from the impact? Well,
because hurt has an intent, an unintent, but it also has a perception.
Absolutely. It has an unintent, but it has a perception.
And the perception, I've discovered, is the most difficult thing to change. Whether the discussion goes barrage or goes silent, the perception is very extremely difficult to get past.
And it becomes even more difficult for people to get past it if they have a negative history with that other person. So if you don't like me, I don't like you, then my ability to give you the benefit of the doubt that maybe your intention wasn't nasty and malicious, maybe you were actually trying to help, goes down significantly. And that's a real challenge for an awful lot of people. Derry?
Would you say, or could you say that if you look at it on a much larger scale, with what's going on in our country in the United States right now, between the police and all of the people, that this is at play as well?
It's definitely at play. I would say it's not the only thing that's at play by any means, but it is one of the biggest traps that we fall into as human beings. Now, take intent and impact. Add in the power of the story that we create. Add in the piece that we were talking about on Thursday around assumptions being elevated to the level of fact. Add in the victim, villain, hero triangle, which if we have time today, we'll spend a little bit of time looking at a little more closely. Add that in. And all those roles that we get into. And it's no wonder we end up in all kinds of nasty, significant messes. But what I wanted to do at the moment then is to actually step away from the intent and impact piece and instead start to look at priorities and intentions. So if you think about it, one of the things that I've learned, one of the things that I came across, and for me this model has an immense amount of practical applicability. And what it says is that as human beings, we have 4 primary intentions. We all have all of them, but we have them in varying percentages or in varying intensities. And those 4 intentions are to get it done, get it right, get along, and get acknowledged or get appreciated. Now, if you think about that, they all make perfect sense, at least to me. They're all things that we need to do. And I want you to think about a time when you have had an extremely difficult week. It's Friday afternoon. You have just finished one of those brutal weeks where you've had a whole lot of challenges to deal with. You're tired, you're a little stressed, and you're going into a weekend where you have nothing that you have to do. So you can decompress, and you need to. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to offer you some options, and I'm going to ask you to pick the way you would be most likely to relax. So if you would be tempted to go to the gym, go for a run, mow the lawn, split wood, clean the house, do the gardening, like heavy-duty gardening, you're digging the garden. If you would be tempted to do that kind of thing, then I would ask you to go to that corner back there behind Omai. If you would be more likely to pull out a crossword puzzle, a Sudoku puzzle, do your genealogy, do some online research around your family tree, do some crafting, perhaps build something, you know, go into the workshop and create something. If you'd be more tempted to do that kind of thing, to do something that takes your brain into another world than what it's been in and gives you something to focus on. You might even relax by doing algebraic equations. If that sort of thing appeals to you most, where it's more cognitive and you're going to get into your head, then I would like you to go to that corner. If you would be tempted to relax by taking a bath, going for a walk, by yourself, perhaps reading a book, watching a movie. Oh, by the way, the guys in that corner would also be playing video games. But taking a nap, going for a walk, reading a book, perhaps arranging flowers, perhaps going through and organizing your things somewhat, but you know, sort of on your own, quiet, where you can pull back from being involved with other people and give yourself some space, then please come up to this corner, up here. Now, if you would be more likely to call up a group of friends and say, let's go out drinking, let's have some fun, let's have a party. If that would be more of your approach, where you're going to get together with a group of friends and you're going to socialize and you're going to have fun and you're going to relax and you're just going to put everything else out of your mind, then please come on up to this quadrant.
Is that the last option?
It's the last one. So typically,
I want to go for a very...
Does that include travel? Yeah, absolutely. That would include travel. Okay. Interesting split.
Was that travel back there?
No, travel would actually be over here. Now, here's the thought. We are all a blend. So some people will be standing there going, well, I would do that, but I would also do that. Pick the one that would be most relaxing for you if you'd had a bad week. Not just sort of what you like to do, but how would you decompress after a very, very bad week? Okay, so look around the room. See who's in which quadrants. Now, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and if you need to move, feel free to move, but just remember where you started out, okay? So, would you consider yourself to be more outgoing? In other words, high energy. So you have a motor that's kind of vroom, vroom, vroom. You know, you're a goer, you're a doer. Would you be more outgoing? Or would you be more quiet and passive, more reserved, where your motor would sound more like where you tend to have a more passive energy? If you would be more outgoing, please go, to this side of the room. If you would be more quiet energy, more passive energy, then go to this side of the room. Okay, all right. Now, if you consider yourself to be more task-focused.
More what?
Task-focused. So, you're on a mission, you've got things that need to get done, and you're looking to finish that to-do list. You are task-focused, that's your priority, get stuff done. And get it done right. But it's more the task, then I would ask you to go to that corner. That end of the room. Stay on the side of the room that you're on, but just go to that end.
Is that when you're off? Are we talking about when
Well, you can pick however you want, because you may be different when you're at work than you are when you're off.
Can we wait for all the options?
And then the other one is
Is it what you would like to be or what you are?
no, what you are.
I got it.
and
I'd like to be more testful.
the other option, yeah, are you more people focused? So in other words, relationships, you would look after people more than the task. So if somebody came into your office upset, and you had a deadline in an hour that you needed to meet, would you ditch the deadline and say, you know what, you're upset, sit down and tell me what it is? Or would you look at that person and say, you know what, can you come back in an hour? Because I got something I got to get done. If you would ask them to come back in an hour, then you want to be at that end of the room. If you would ditch the deadline and say, you know, come on in, sit down, I can tell you're upset and you know, something's wrong, then you're more people focused. Okay, so look, how many people moved? Okay, now my question, how many people stayed exactly where they were? Okay, so we've got a few. Yeah, how many people moved? Now, my question is, did you move along the wall or did you move diagonally across?
Along the wall.
Along the wall. Did you go across? From there to there. Okay, come on back and sit down.
Wait a minute, we have to know if we were right.
Oops.
You lost your identity, Wes.
Oh, that's I can live without my identity. So basically what we're looking at is that we adapt to our environment as well. So our priorities and our intentions adapt depending on the context that we're in. What's interesting though is we don't change how we relax. And the reason I ask people how they relax is that is the best indicator of which your home quadrant likely is. Because even if I tend to be very people focused and very quiet, but I'm in a managerial position where I need to be more get it done, I'm still going to relax by reading a book or taking a bath or doing whatever, because that's not going to change. So then think about how far you had to move when I started asking the second set of questions, because if your home area is here and you ended up over here, you're in a situation where you're investing a huge amount of energy to move all the way over there. Moving here isn't quite so bad because you share the reserve trait moving here. These are both quiet energy. Or you share the people trait going this way, but when you go over here, you don't share either one. And so there's just more energy required to move over there. It doesn't mean we can't do it, and doesn't mean we won't do it, but it just means that chances are we have to put a fair bit of energy into working in that, with those priorities and those intentions. So what I would like to, so remember where you ended up, because what I would like to do is take a little bit of time to talk about the 4 quadrants, but I didn't want to ask you to stay up. So think about the folks who were in this quadrant back in the corner over here. Who was in that quadrant? Just a quick show of hands. Shirley? There was a whole bunch of people. Ralph? Yeah, where you ended up over there. You were in there as well? Okay, I thought there were more than 3. Who was there with you?
My friend was listening.
Okay, anyhow, so those are our get it done folks. They tend to be more solution focused. Their priority is to finish things, and they are driven by results. The worst thing you can do to a get it done person who's in that mindset is to put them in a training course and then give them boring stuff for a whole day. You can just sit there and watch them just boil. Yeah, absolutely. They hate slow. And they find it very, very difficult for people to question their approach to things and so on, because they're on a mission. And that results focus can be a bit of a challenge. Now, I will say that the day you folks moved out of home, that was the happiest day of your parents' life, because you stopped running the show. 10% of the population lives in that quadrant, and it's probably a good thing it's only 10%, because otherwise the rest of the world would be struggling somewhat. So then over in this quadrant, we had a couple of people, right? Who was in this quadrant? It was you? And what was your name?
Jason.
Jason? And Omar? Kay. Okay, so in that quadrant, what we're looking at is the task-focused but quieter energy. These are your quality control folks. They are the ones whose priority will be to get things right. And so as a result, think about the potential for conflict between this corner and this corner. I actually did a mediation with senior management team once, and I did this exercise with them. There were 17 people on this senior management team. Now here was the distribution we ended up with. We had 16 in that corner, and we had 1 in that corner. Guess who the boss was? There was an out-and-out mutiny going on, because in their world, he was the biggest roadblock that there ever was. In his world, from his perspective, he had very much a quality focus. He wanted the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And so he would do things, can I borrow your, he would do things like, oh, this is your report, Susan. It's not quite as thick as I was hoping. Perhaps you'd like to have another go at it. Now, she's get it done in this situation. What's your reaction to?
My God, I spent enough time on it. I did it.
It's done. What's your problem? So then she brings it back, and she's added a couple more pages, and he would look at it and go, I think it would look a little better if it was in a different font.
I had a boss like that.
Yeah, font. You can hear your get it done people going, font? Who cares about the font? So then it comes back, and he looks at it and he goes, I think there's a comma missing on page 3.
You know what I would say to him? I would say that anal retention.
But he's your boss.
But he's your boss.
That's his perspective.
And here's the thing. There is a huge amount of conflict that goes on between the get it right and the get it done folks, because there is a perception out there that you can have quality or you can have speed. But you can't have both. Now, I don't buy that, but the thing is that frequently we end up in conflict when we don't value what the other person brings to the mix.
Yes.
We don't value what they bring to the team. Now, if you think about it, for those of you who are in life partner relationships, typically we marry our polar opposite because opposites attract. And that works so long as we value what they bring to the mix. But for those who are opposite to us, they don't share any of our traits. If I'm outgoing and task-focused, then chances are my partner will be people-focused and perhaps quieter. Opposites attract, but then opposites attack. And so when we lose the value that the other person brings to the mix, we have a tendency to then start devaluing and creating issues and conflicts around everything that's going on. So it's interesting because I was starting my own little research project on this. I don't do divorce mediations, but I know a lot of people who are getting divorced. And I've actually started asking people, what was it that attracted you to him in the first place? And people will say things like, well, I was always very quiet. I was more likely to like be doing research and things like that. He was the life of the party. Like, I actually had a social life when I met him. I said, well, why are you getting divorced? He's never home. So what happens then is that it's the same trait, only in the initial stages we look at the positive aspect of it, and in the final stages we're looking at the downside of it. Okay, so just hang on, Derry. Let me go through the 4 of them. Okay, so our get it right folks are the ones who tend to be quality focused. They are driven to ensure that what is being done the way it should be. They will have read the research, they will have read the legislation, they will have read the rules, they will, if you ask them to put a barbecue together, they will actually put everything out on a tarp, count the number of pieces that came just to make sure that you've got them all, and read the instructions, and then assemble it. Their whole premise is do it once, do it right, you don't have to come back to it. So it's not unusual to have get it done folks who actually have a fairly healthy dose of get it right in them as well. It's an interesting combination because sometimes the speed and the quality can be a bit of a challenge. The get along folks, we had quite a group up here. Who were our get along folks? Yeah? Did you move? Over there, okay. Okay. So our get along folks that are over here, these are your loyal team players who are the glue that will hold your team together. Where the get it done and the get acknowledged folks tend to be big picture thinkers. They're great entrepreneurs and starters. They are not good finishers, but your get along folks are. They will pick up a project and they will carry it through to completion. And they're good at it. They are immensely loyal. Because they're driven by relationships. They see the value in having the relationships and investing in creating those relationships. So they will take the time to make sure everybody is okay. They're your peace and harmony folks. They don't like conflict, and they hate to be the bad guy. Now, 35 to 40% of the population lives in that quadrant most happily. So, in that context, we have a huge potential for getting along. We don't always do it, but we have a huge potential for it. The challenge with the get along folks is they will take a lot, but only so much. And if you push those folks to the point, yeah, I can see heads nodding already. If you push those folks, look at who was in that quadrant, folks, and please take a look around the room and watch the heads nod when I say this. You push those folks beyond their limit, they reach a tipping point. And when they start feeling used and abused, they will write you off. And they will write you off to the point where you ain't getting me back. Take a look. I'm sitting here watching. Amen. Because they will go to the nth degree for you so long as you also value your relationship with them. But if they have a perception that you are using them or abusing them, then they will literally, well, as one person said, at that point, you're dead to me. So one of the things to watch when you're mediating is, do you have somebody who's a get-along kind of person who is so frustrated and so hurt by what has happened that they are unable to give the other person the benefit of the doubt or to come back to where they can restore or repair the relationship? That is not unusual. It takes an awful lot of work to help those folks even be willing to sit down and try. Because, quite frankly, they're done. They've had it. The get acknowledged folks, this was our group that was over in this corner. High energy, people focused. They're the life of the party. When they moved out of home, it was the saddest day of their parents' life because all the fun went with them. Now, part of the challenge with the get acknowledged folks is that they are really good big picture thinkers. They're great starters. They will have a million ideas running through their heads at the same time. These folks don't read one book. They have 6 on the go at any given time. What's that? They not only have 6 on the go, but they have them scattered all over the place, so they're just available whenever they need them. So there'll be one in the bathroom, one in the bedroom, a couple in the living room. But there is a risk to that, because there's only so much people can do, and they get very easily distracted. The best description of this group that I have ever come across is squirrel. Because they have a very serious case of what I would call SOS. Shiny object syndrome. Oh, we could do that. Oh, we could do that. Why don't we do this? Oh, and I have a daughter who fits in this quadrant, and I would say to her, go and get your backpack, the bus is coming up the road. Now the bus is not going to wait for her. When the bus lands at the end of the driveway, the bus driver expects her to be there ready to get on the bus, right? So I would send her 10 minutes in advance. Get your backpack, you need to head down the laneway. From the time she left the kitchen to go to the living room and get her backpack, she would read 3 pages in a book, stop and pet the dog, pick up something and play with it. She would look out the window, she would turn on the TV, and then she would come back and she still didn't have the backpack. So details are not their strong suit. Now, if you can think about it, what's opposite to get acknowledged is get it right. Who do they marry?
Best friend.
What's the potential that they're going to stay married? If they value what the other person brings to the relationship, yes, absolutely, they're a powerful team, because the get it right folks will cover their blind spot. The get it right folks are detail focused. They're the ones who are going to make the reservation for the trip. Folks in that quadrant, and I can say this with all honesty because I have a fair bit of that in me, I sat down one night. I had to go to British Columbia, which in Canada is on the far west coast. So it's about a 10,000 kilometer drive, like distance. And I sat down on a Friday night. I had to be there by the following Saturday, like a week later. I hadn't bought my ticket yet because I hadn't quite figured out when I needed to leave and when I could get away. Friday night at 8 o'clock, I had the brilliant idea that if I drove, I could take the kayaks with me because I'd never paddled in the Pacific Ocean. My daughter was living in BC. I had a kayak for her that I couldn't figure out how to get out there to her. And I thought, well, if you bring your own car, then you've got wheels. You can bring all your own stuff. Awesome. So 8 o'clock Friday night, I decided to drive across Canada. And I left at 11 o'clock Saturday morning. So literally, you know that commercial that they used to have, I don't know whether, we had it in Canada, I don't know if you did, where they were going on a trip and they open the window and they're bouncing the bags off a trampoline into the back of the car? That was just about it. I called my mother when I got on the road and said, I'm heading for Squamish, Mom. And she goes, Squamish, which is right out on the BC west coast. And I said, yeah. She said, well, are you at the airport? I said, no, I decided to drive last night. And she goes, what? Well, did you plan, like have you got reservations? What are you going to do? I said, I don't know, I'll just wing it. So that would be that fun, it'll all fall into place. Now, how many people who were in the get it right quadrant were sitting here right now going, oh my God, you didn't have maps, you didn't have, you didn't have a plan, you didn't have reservations, what if something goes wrong, all of that. So they can drive each other crazy, but they can also balance each other out because each of those quadrants opposite covers the other person's blind spot or blind spots. Does that make sense? Now, let's look at how it actually plays out when we get into the real world. Oops. Get going the right way here, we'll be doing well. So for the get it done folks, the list on the left, this side, are the things that they would say about themselves. They are determined, they are direct, they are deliberate, they are diligent, they are goal-oriented, they will drive and get things done, they're courageous. This is how they are when things are going well, and it's also their vision of themselves. They can be defiant in that they love a challenge. So, if you really want to get it done person to get at something, to take on a project, tell them they can't do it. Because what's their instinctive reaction going to be? No? You think? Watch me. They're competitive. They like to win. And they like to prove that they can do or that they're right or, there is a certain drive there to keep things moving and also to be able to put the tick in the checkbox that says we're done. Now, here's the challenge. Think about, because these are priorities and intentions, right? What happens if the deadline is not going to get met? We're running late. Productivity is low. Things are not getting done. Then typically what happens is that get-it-done person will move out and take control. They are the first person who will step up to the plate and say, let's get this back on track. And they will take over. Now, when they take control, parents, by the way, are extremely good at doing this. Get in the car. I don't care if you have the shoes that you want or the jacket that you want. We have a doctor's appointment in 20 minutes. Move it. That would be a get-it-done person taking control. So that list on the right, that's other people's experience of a get-it-done person when they've taken over. This is the part that causes the divorces, because this is the downside to that get-it-done approach to things. So other people, and I see this a lot, because if you go back to the circle, whose opposite get-it-done is get-along? They hate conflict. So a get-it-along person is not going to be happy with somebody saying, sit down, shut up, do what I tell you to do, and get this thing finished. That is just going to annoy them no end. So what you end up with then is the harassment complaints. Frequently the get-along person is the complainant and the get-it-done person is the respondent. And what I hear from people when I'm interviewing them is, from the get-along person, ask him to lift his shoe. Take a look at all of the faces on the sole of that shoe. Those are the people he's walked over to get where he is. That's their perception. And so when you think about it, from their experience, and this goes back to, I think we talked about this on Thursday, there are 6 personalities in every interaction between two people. There's me as I see myself, there's me as you see me, and there's me as I really am. This is me as I see myself, this is me as you experience me when I'm in control mode. If I go through life believing the rest of the world sees me the same way I see myself, we have a problem. Now, have you heard people in mediation saying, he's arrogant, he's ruthless, he's abrasive, he's difficult, he's impatient, and he will cut corners? The get-it-right folks hate the fact that there's a tendency for the get-it-done folks to say, you know what, we don't need that part on this. We can safely cut this corner. We can speed this up if we do this. They get-it-right folks see these people when they're taking control and trying to get things back on track as being haphazard, as being unconcerned about quality, as being likely to be reckless or cut corners, or especially in safety-related things, huge amount of conflict that goes back and forth across that line. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, if you want to drive a get-it-done folks crazy, then just slow down how you talk and focus on things that aren't involved with getting things finished, and they will just be boiling. Because if you want to speak their language, you're going to snap it up. It's going to be faster, it's going to be punchy, it's going to be brief and to the point. And if I'm having a conversation with a get-it-done person, I'm going to say things like, you know what, we've got to make that 4 o'clock deadline. Listen to the pace, listen to the words. We've got to make that 4 o'clock deadline. Now, we still have to do a decent job, but we need to make sure that under no circumstances do we miss that line in the sand that we were given, that drop dead date. And they'll be going, yeah, because it speaks to their priority. Gary.
Well, there's 2 points. One is to go back earlier about what you had said in that scenario in the beginning. You know, I see this a little bit differently, the way you're describing it. I know it's based on a model. But what I see is a lot of power and control. Mm-hmm. So when the boss is saying, you know, what about the font size, and what about you need to add more pages to this. I'm always looking at what's healthy and unhealthy behavior. And I think that it's up to the person who's being abused or feel like they're being abused or taken advantage of to be able to have a voice and say, hey, this is how I see it,
Absolutely.
And that's my goal.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when we come right back to the fundamental priority that is driving the behavior, their priority, if they're in that get it right quadrant, is to make sure that all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed. Let me go to the get it right one. And to ensure that there is that consistent quality across the board. So that's where they're going. Now, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to have a discussion about it. It doesn't mean that they can't talk about it and work it out. Yeah, absolutely, they can. I mean, otherwise we'd be in constant turmoil.
We are very
But there are a lot of times where we attribute the conflict to something that is personal, when in reality what we have is a conflicting set of priorities and intentions, which creates what I would consider to be more of a situational conflict. And when you can depersonalize it like that, I had two mechanics who haven't talked to each other in 3 years. One is a get it done and the other is a get it right. And my comments about safety and cutting corners, that is exactly what I heard from both of them. I'm not working with him. I'm not safe working with him because he doesn't care about quality. All he wants to do is be able to walk back to the boss and say, this is done, this is done, this is done, this is done, this is done. So we've got multiple ticks in the checkbox. I had a great day. That was the get it right guy's perception of the get it done guy. The get it done guy's perception of the other guy was, hate working with him because we have to stop and we have to read through all the work protection codes and we have to make sure the isolation is good. He said, I can tell just looking at it that the isolation is done. These guys worked in an electrical facility, and so when they were working on things, you had to be absolutely sure that the machine you were working on was not live, or you would not be. And so in that sense, they had very, very competing priorities. They had not talked to each other in 3 years. I did this at a training session for them, and we broke for lunch. And they actually sat down and had lunch together, and I was close enough I could overhear. And this was the conversation that for the first time in 3 years, they talked to each other. The get it right guy says, you know what? I can see why I piss you right off. And the get it done guy goes, you have no idea. He said, yeah, actually, I think I do now. He said, I didn't before, but he said, do you have any idea how you piss me off? He said, yeah, you must think that I'm the most slap-happy, risk-taking, what did he call it? Tool jockey that you could imagine. And the other guy's going, yeah. So what it did was it allowed them to have a conversation about what was going on between them that wasn't personal. Like it didn't have the acrimony in it. And so they could step back and they could see how they got off track. That's the power of this model that I found.
And you in that model, then you're changing a culture, which is systemic based, of changing the systems which cause extraordinary amounts of money in all industry across the world, sick people, stressed out people, layoffs, and so I always look at changing the culture.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah, and I hear what she's saying. The culture's been changed, but also what has been changed is the engagement of conflict. Because invariably what I've discovered, which I hear you saying also, Ruth, most assuredly, most people or some people do not truly engage in conflict. What they do is they hurl assaults at each other, and then it just go on and on. But when people truly engage
in terms of having conversations in the conflict, you mean? Yeah.
And then there's an understanding of the differences of the conflict.
What I find with this, Ralph, is that this gives people a language that they can use to bridge the gap.
Correct.
And that is immensely powerful. But the other thing about this is it's not highly theoretical in the sense of, like, if I were to ask most people who've done a Myers-Briggs thing a few years ago, what was your 4 letters? They kind of go, I think it was an IFT, I don't know, something like that, right? But if you ask people, get it done, get it right, get along, get acknowledged, they'll go, yeah, I was that get it right guy. It's sticky. It's sticky, and it I've used it now all over the world, and I've used it with groups right from my mechanics and construction guys right up to deputy ministers and CEOs. It resonates at every level. And for me, that is one of the most powerful things. So the model, the get it right, get it done, get along, get appreciated, also meshes very well with the DISC model, which is a personality type thing. So your get it done are your Ds. Your get it right are your Cs, you're cautious. Your get along are your S's. And your get acknowledged are your I's, you're inspiring. So those actually work well together, and I use the two of them together. So some of the language here is coming actually out of the DISC stuff. Yeah, the DISC model meshes very, very well with this. So you get it right, folks. Careful, cautious, competent. They will do the research. If you work in a legislated environment, they will be able to quote the legislation to you. They will know which section and which paragraph it's in. I actually have a friend who is so much in this quadrant, he reads the occupational health and safety legislation to relax. I look at him and go, you have got to be kidding me. If you asked somebody in this quadrant to read policy and legislation, what would they be saying? Do you not have an executive summary? Like the whole thing? Seriously? Because to them that's a killer, to have to sit down and slog through all of that very dry, boring type stuff. So what do they like? They like high standards. They like things to be done the way they're supposed to be done. They hate being criticized. This is the other thing in mediations. It is almost impossible for these folks to be happy apologizing. Because in their world, they did the research, they knew that they were on solid ground in their mind, and to have to apologize is admitting that they were wrong and that somehow they missed something. That's a tough haul for them, because it's just not comfortable for them. They also hate change, especially change that is ramrodded through in a hurry. Because they want time to process it. They want to be able to sit back and develop a plan for how they're going to do it. They want to figure out, is this going to work? They need to do that research. So they struggle in environments where it is continually, we did that yesterday, today we're heading in a different direction. Especially if they're in the middle of a project and they get pulled off to go somewhere else. Or the direction of the project changes, so we had all of this invested in heading that direction, and now we've just been told we have to head this direction. That is crazy making for them. They also, they will go to the nth degree to make things work. They have that reserved energy. They are great team players. They will self-sacrifice to make sure that things are happening the way they're supposed to, but they are frequently seen as roadblocks. So look at what's on the right-hand side. How other people experience them when they get out of control, or when the priority is out of control. So if things are not being done the way they should be, they have that perception, then they will come across as rigid, inflexible, critical, picky, worrisome, compulsive, nosy, easily offended, unsociable. Like they go into that kind of a mode because they're not happy with the way things are. The other thing and we'll see it in the next set of slides when we look at it, is that they will actually shut down. Not unusual, because they'll write it off. So our folks that were over here, they are, like I said before, your loyal team players that will go to the nth degree for you. They also don't like change being ramrodded down their throat. They want time to process it. Sorry?
The flex.
Yes, absolutely. They're friendly. They are great listeners. They are your people folks. If there's a problem, they'll be the ones showing up with chicken soup saying, you look like you need a hug. Because for them, the relationships are everything. When they send emails, their emails will look like, hi Ruth, hope you had a great weekend. And I heard that you were heading off to a big family event. Hope it goes well. By the way, when you have a minute, could you get that report to me this afternoon, if possible? Now, what would the email, oh, and then take care, and they'll sign it. Now, what does an email from a Get It Done person look like?
Where's your report?
I need the report by 4 o'clock. Where is it? No salutation, no, and not even a name at the bottom, right? Now, when the Get Along folks get that email, that one-liner that says, I need the report by 4 o'clock, get on it, will you?
Push it down my throat.
There, it's being rammed down my throat, and that's where they start to see that Get It Done person as heartless, pushy, obnoxious, doesn't care, doesn't invest any time in the relationship, not a people person, and they will start to pull back and shut down. And that's, remember when on Thursday when I was telling you about the situation where the people are very angry with me because my report didn't finger the manager? Every single one of the people who have sent me a nasty email saying that I didn't label the manager as being the problem is a Get Along person. She is very much a Get It Done person, and her emails are one-liners. And they say things like, that's a management prerogative, and it's under control. You know, when somebody's made a suggestion about how they could do things better, her response was, that's a management prerogative, it is under control. So what does the Get Along person who's just written a 2-page email about how we could do a process better, what's their response to a one-line email back that says that's a manager's prerogative and we have it under control? Yeah, pretty much. Now the other distinction is our reserve folks live in a world of subtle, and our more outgoing folks live in a world of oblivious. So I will say to that harassment complaint, the complainant in the harassment case, did you tell so-and-so that you were unhappy with the way things were going? And they will say, and remember the Get Along, they will say, well, yes, absolutely. I said, well, what did you actually say to them? Well, I didn't actually say anything, but I gave them the look. Now, what does the look do for somebody who's in Get It Done mode?
Don't even see it.
They don't even see it. It's just quiet time. They can say more. So they tend to live in a world of oblivious. They don't pick up the subtle clues nearly as well or as easily, and so there's a very different approach to how they actually communicate when there are issues and problems, and that can be hugely problematic. So you've got 30-40% of your people who are in this quadrant by, like, it's their sort of home space. And there was something else I was going to say about this. Don't sell these folks short, because they literally are the glue that will hold your team together. They are the ones who will make stuff happen, and we write them off at our peril. Now, our Get Appreciated folks who were over here in this corner, this is the I in the DISC model.
Yeah.
They are optimistic, they are multitaskers, they are incredibly good at the big picture overview. Little hard to get them out of the clouds sometime. The multitasking piece, it can be really beneficial, but it also can be problematic. So one of the descriptions that somebody gave me was, you know the little water bug that you see on the water? That would be, there's a very powerful tendency for these folks to end up there. They get bored easy. They're great on short-term projects. They have a much harder time with longer-term repetitive projects. These are not the people you want to hire to be on your assembly line. Because by the time the third car comes down the pipe, they're going to be putting the wheels on sideways, just to see what would happen. And if you ask them to assemble a barbecue, they'll look at the picture and go, well, this can't be that hard. And then at the end, they go, hey, look, they said spare parts. They're incredibly compassionate. They're very much people-focused. They are the early warning signs for when your project is getting off track in the bigger picture. The get it right folks are the early warning signs. They're the canary in the mine for when your details are lacking. But these folks are the ones who will go, whoa, 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 whoa. We're actually supposed to be building a cathedral. This is starting to look more like a grocery store. And they're the ones who will pick that up. They're very perceptive in that sense. They're great on short-term projects, especially high-energy projects. And they love to be connected. They're driven by fun, and they're driven by connections. So they love to network. They're amazing networkers. They make great salespeople. They make great, they do well at conferences and so on. They'll be out there meeting, they'll be talking to everybody in the elevator. Hey, how was your day? You know, that sort of thing. That's not unusual. Now, when that get acknowledged intention is in jeopardy, or they are under pressure, then they can become a bit of a challenge, and other people will experience that negative side of it. They can be gossipy. They can be excitable. Directionless is the biggest one that shows up, unfocused. And it's one of the biggest challenges, if you were in that quadrant, one of the biggest challenges is to pull back and actually have a plan and follow the plan. It's one of the things that they deal with a lot. Now, the other thing is they don't like criticism either. And they have an amazing capacity to rationalize and self-justify. They will always have a reason for why things didn't get done, or they did get done the way they did, or whatever. They'll always have an explanation. And so other people have said trying to get through to them is tough because they're Teflon. It just kind of slides off. Is this making any sense?
Yes.
Anybody sitting there going, oh, I know who fits in that quadrant? Because that was what I did when I first saw it. So here's oops, hit the right thing here. Put it all together. When the get it done person is, that get it done intention is in jeopardy, they will take control. And as they take control, the three behaviors that you are most likely to see are the tank. That's the my way or the highway. Get in the car. I don't care what you have. Sit down. Don't move until that homework is finished. Your job today is to finish this report. Nothing else until I have it on my desk. That's the tank, the bulldozer, who isn't particularly concerned about relationships because get along isn't even on the radar at this point. The sniper. Anybody ever met one of those? Well, if you really cared about this job, you would have had this done yesterday. Any parent worth their salt would have taught their children not to do that by now. Ding! And you've got the zingers flying, right? So when the sniping starts, or the tank starts, what happens to other people?
They feel attacked.
The shields go up. Yes, sorry, Derry?
They feel attacked.
They feel attacked, absolutely. The other behavior that you're likely to see with the get-it-done person is the know-it-all. Now, often you get a tank know-it-all or a sniper know-it-all. They kind of work hand in hand. And so people will be saying things like, I don't need your opinion. I don't need your input. I know exactly what we need to do. And this is the way it's going to go. That's the my way or the highway kind of approach. Now, for the get it right folks, the ones who were in that quadrant over there, when things are not being done in the right way, the quality is not there because they are driven by quality. They have a tendency to move out into perfection mode. It's no longer enough to do a good job. It's no longer even enough to do an excellent job. Now we're looking for perfection. Every I has to be dotted just right, every T has to be crossed just right, and the behaviors that you're likely to see there are the no person, the one who says, no, I'm sorry, if you're not going to do this project the way it should be done, take me off the team. And they will literally do this, and they will walk away scientists, engineers, you see this a lot. They are not going to risk their professional reputation by being associated with something that is not up to the standards that they feel are necessary. And so they will physically remove themselves from the situation. Now, when they've done that, they are not coming back unless they are 100% assured that their issues and concerns have been heard. So if you're mediating in a scientific environment or in a construction environment and you've got somebody going, no, sorry, I'm not having anything to do with this, chances are you've got a get it right person who has moved out into that extreme mindset. Now, the nothing person is the one who does not physically disengage but psychologically disengages and goes, yeah, whatever. Nobody's listening to me anyhow, so who cares? Do whatever you have to do, but don't ask me for my help. So you're going to sink or swim on your own without me. Just give me my paycheck every 2 weeks and stay out of my face. That's what you'll get from that. By the way, teenagers have that nothing thing down to an absolute science. Whatever, fine, is very much a nothing kind of behavior. And the other one that you'll get here is our all-time favorite, the chronic complainer. And on they go. And they have a long list of everything that has been missed, everything that has been done, and which then becomes problematic when they actually need to get a message across, because what does everybody do with the chronic complainer? La 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 la, or glaze over, tune them out. So, which then frustrates the chronic complainer even more, because now they realize that, you know, nobody's listening to them. What do? They ramp up the volume, ramp up the rhetoric. So no longer are they upset, now they're angry. No longer are they irritated, now they're mad. No longer is it upsetting, now it's harassing. So that the language gets escalated, the volume gets escalated, and I was facilitating a meeting once, and I actually had the senior manager who had brought me in to do the facilitation said to me, listen, there's a guy, he always has a black shirt on, he always has a red tie. He's got long hair pulled into a ponytail. If he opens his mouth, do not let him start. So I'm going in to facilitate this meeting, which, granted, they'd had some issues in previous meetings, and I have just been told that there's one participant who is not allowed to say anything. And I'm looking at them going, seriously? Like, really? I can't let somebody talk? He said, no, don't ever let him, because if you ever let him get started, you will never shut him up. So my approach was at lunchtime, because he actually hadn't tried to say anything up until lunchtime. At lunchtime, I went and had lunch with him. And we had a discussion around how he could perhaps try a somewhat different approach, because he said to me, he said, oh, they hate it when I start, because I am just going to sit there and tell them everything that has been done wrong around here for the last 27 years. I said, okay, well, maybe we could modify the approach somewhat. So he and I had an agreement, because he was having issues with some of the stuff that was coming up, and I'm looking at him saying, those are issues that need to be raised. Because frequently your chronic complainer is your canary in the mind who is seeing things that are getting off track. It's the approach that they're using that is becoming hugely problematic. So you can work with them in terms of helping them find another way of bringing things up. You can sometimes get them back on board. Your get along folks, because they're focused on relationships, they are going to be very cautious when there is conflict, because they don't want to add fuel to the fire. They don't want to make things worse. And so they will sit on the fence. They will become, when it says approval seeking, it's not that they're saying, you know, tell me I'm okay, you know, this is right. But what they want is they want to make sure that what the choices that they're making are not going to add fuel to the fire. So they're seen by others as being hesitant and fence sitting, because they're sitting there going, yeah, well, let's just kind of see how this plays out. You know, like I'm not, or they're Switzerland in the sense that they don't want to get involved. The yes person. There is a tendency that these folks will overcommit because they hate to be the bad guy. They don't like to say no. That is their killer word, is to have to say no, because they don't want to let anybody down. And so they will be more likely to say, sure, yeah, absolutely, I can bake pies for you this weekend. Now, I don't even get home until Friday night. I don't tell you that. And I'm going, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but yeah, I'll bake pies for you. Because they don't want to be the bad guy. They don't want to say no. Or certainly, yes, I can have your report for you by tomorrow morning. Now, they've also promised 16 other people that they'll have stuff done for them. There's no way they can deliver. And so in that sense, frequently they get themselves into trouble because they end up dropping balls, and then it would have probably been better if they just said no in the first place. But the reality is that they're very uncomfortable saying no. So that yes person can be a bit of a challenge. Again, the nothing person, they will disengage because it's safer to disengage than it is to risk the relationship. And so as a result, what you end up with is somebody who pulls back and says, yeah, you know what, it's not really my issue. I don't really want to get pulled into this. And so they'll psychologically pull back from it. The get acknowledged or get appreciated folks, when they feel that people are not getting credit, for instance, where credit is due, or the connections, the fun is gone out of it, the connections aren't there, people are disconnecting, they will be more likely to take it, lose it. And so they're the ones who will jump up in a meeting and go, wait! And everybody else goes, what? Where did that come from? So in that sense, they can become the grenade. Take it, blow. They also can be a sniper. Now the sniper that they tends to be that more friendly sniper that's the double-edged comments, the sort of innuendos, a little more passive-aggressive sometimes in the way it comes out, because it's like humor cloaked with a message underneath it. Now the think they know it all is the other one that can show up. This one is actually hugely problematic. It doesn't show up as often as the others, but when it does, it can be an issue. And you may encounter this in mediations. I've had it. It's a real challenge because this is where Teflon comes in a big way. The think they know it all has small amount of knowledge and an amazing capacity to spin it. Now, I live in Ottawa, which is the capital city of Canada. We have a small piece of property in the middle of Ottawa, right on the Ottawa River, has a very large tower, and it's populated by a group of people who get elected every 4 years. It's affectionately known as the hot air center of the country. Politicians, used car salespeople, there's a whole lot of folks who rely on that ability to frame things in a way that catch people's attention. Now, I have a background in science. I used to work wildlife toxicology before I got into mediation. If you put me in a room full of poets and asked me to talk about quantum physics, I can make it sound pretty good. I got enough of a science background to be able to put it out there. But if you put me in a room full of quantum physicists, it would take 1.3 milliseconds for them to figure out that we have a little bit of knowledge and a whole lot of fluff going on here. The challenge with the think they know it all is unless you are actually a substance matter expert or you have the substantive knowledge to be able to challenge what they're saying, you may or may not know whether they actually know what they're talking about or not. But they have an amazing capacity to spin and frame things in a way that makes it sound good. So here's just a real quick example. I had a situation where I had somebody who's very, very high in this quadrant, and they had become a team member for a group that had been together for about 2 years. So this was a project team in a workplace that had been put together. They came on the team, and somehow or another, when the call from the media came in for an interview, they ended up answering the phone. Now, these folks are very comfortable in front of a room full of people. It doesn't bother them in the slightest to do interviews, to make presentations, and so on. They're comfortable on their feet. They think fast on their feet. And so this individual said, sure, yes, I'd be happy to talk to you about the project team. Now, remember, they've only been on the team for 3 weeks. I heard the interview. This is what it sounded like. Well, actually, yeah, it's an extremely important project, and I think we're getting things back on track now. I'm hopeful that within the next few months that we're going to make significantly more progress than we have so far. There have been some issues and some challenges, but I think I've got it, back on track. What does it sound like?
It was a failure till they got there.
And what has this individual just done to the rest of the team?
Thrown them under the bus.
Absolutely. And the team was livid. First off, that they would consider that they had the right to do this interview after only having been on the team for a couple of weeks, and other people had been on it for years. And secondly, the way it was framed. And the individual that I was working with couldn't get that. They couldn't understand why everybody was upset with them. And they said, but there were issues. Yeah, but it's the way you put them out there, like somehow you're riding in on the white horse and you're going to save it all. So there was a huge issue. Now, this was also an individual who was so high in that quadrant they had no boundaries, which was the other challenge. When it gets really out of control, it can be a challenge. So they had a corporate professional development day, strategic planning day, and so on, where the entire organization was there, including the CEO and everybody else. At the end of it, they had a big banquet. And the manager said to me, I was stunned when I looked up at the banquet and saw this individual who's only worked in this organization for 2 months, plunked at the head table right beside the CEO going, hey, yeah, and arm around the shoulders, the whole bit, and felt perfectly justified in just taking the empty chair at the head table and sitting themselves down. And the manager is sitting there going, I can't believe they thought they could do that. So sometimes those boundaries can be an issue and a challenge. These folks can be a bit of a challenge to coach because of the Teflon thing, but you can get through to them. When you point out, and what I did with this individual is I said, you know what, sometimes the folks who have these priorities, they have a tendency to do this kind of thing. He goes, oh yeah, I did that. Now I can talk about it, right? Because he's put it on the table. And say, okay, so what was the reaction of your team when you did that media interview? He said, for some reason, they were all upset. And he couldn't get it. So that's the Teflon thing coming up. Does this make sense? Yep. Okay. So, given time, I think we're probably best to, oh my God. Yeah. What I was going to do was actually give you a chance to test it out. So I'll leave this for you to think about because we're going to go to a break. If you're crazy busy and you've got 3 things that have to get finished before you can leave, but you have to go, somebody interrupts you and tells you they need your help right now to finish a project that is overdue, that's theirs, how would you respond if you were a get it done? You were in get it done mode? How would you respond if you were in get it right mode? How would you respond? What would you be thinking? What would you be feeling in each of those quadrants? This is the part where you want to play with it so that you get a sense when you're in a mediation and you're doing the interviews of where people are coming from. Because the get along person would do it. They would just step in and say, sure, yeah, you know what, I'll stay late, I'll get mine done, I'll help you with yours. Now, they're fuming inside sometimes. How come we have to do this? But they're not going to say it. So what they would say and what they would think are not necessarily the same thing. The get it done person is more likely to say, seriously, you're going to come in here at the last minute and tell me that you've got a project that's overdue? How long have you known that was going to be a problem? And you're leaving it till now? So the reactions are going to be very, very different depending on where they are. The other piece that I want to leave you with on this is I will function in get it right mode when I need to function in get it right mode. And I will be all of those things that was up there when I'm in get it right mode. When I'm in get it done mode, I will be or can be all of those things that was in get it done mode. That's why I say it's not so much personality based as it is contextually based. So depending on what my priority and intention is at the time, I can be ruthless and arrogant if I'm in get it done mode. I can bring chicken soup if I'm in get along mode. I can be the life of the party if that's what I know. We all have a natural inclination that it's easier for us to work with some priorities and some intentions than it is others. But we shift depending on the nature of where we are and what is going on. Now the other piece is sometimes we need to dial up our ability to function in a zone that is perhaps more challenging for us, because that's what's needed. And other times we may need to dial back our natural tendencies. So if I am a solution-focused, get-it-done person, there's a time and a place to be in everybody's face and be the tank or the sniper. And there's another time and a place where, you know what? Shut up. It's not the appropriate time or place to do it. So it's knowing that and knowing when to dial it up and when to dial it back. The other one that is definitely worth looking at is loaning things. So you loan your truck to someone and you want to be helpful, and they're cleaning up all the mess from all their house renos, and you clean it out and you fill it up with gas, and then you drive it to their house and you give it to them on Friday night so they have it for the whole weekend. And on Sunday night they drive back in and hand you back the keys, and when you walk out and you look at your truck, it's covered in mud, it's covered in garbage, the gas tank is empty, and it looks like they've been off-roading with it. What do you say, and what do you do, and what do you think? Depending on which quadrant you're coming from, you're going to have a very different response to that. So that's the power of this approach. And on that note, thank you very, very much.
Ruth, would you maybe address to some extent how you think mediators should deal with people, you know, whether it's in the workplace or just in general, who, if a person was a mediator, how do they deal with people who tend to, for me, I've discovered that a lot of folks, they attack folks and they judge folks and their perception is wrong. And how do we help those people in mediation deal with
step back?
Yeah, how to deal with that? Because that seems for me, that seems like one of the major problems of functions.
I have on occasions, Ralph, been known in the middle of a mediation to sketch this out on a napkin. I did one at a hotel once and I didn't have a flip chart. And I'm drawing it out on a napkin. And we went from a 2.5-hour impasse of just spinning our wheels. Basically, nobody was going anywhere. And one was to get it done, one was to get it right. That was their approach to things. They job shared. But they job shared in the context where they only saw each other once a month for an hour because they were on a ship. And so when crew A was on the ship, then the individual who was in that job was on the ship for a month. And then when they would come into port, the other crew would arrive and they would do a switchover. So they only ever saw each other for an hour and a half a month. But they had mutual harassment complaints against each other. They both filed a harassment complaint. So we've got this kind of two-way harassment thing going on. And it turned out because I'm sitting there and I'm going, because they were so stuck, and just attack, like nasty comments and stuff like. And when I put this out, the one guy said, well, that's me. He said, yeah, I mean, what's driving me nuts is that I come on for my rotation and nothing has been sent out. Nothing has been signed off. So his first reaction was to go, sign it off, sign it off, sign it off, sign it off, ship it out, ship it out, ship it out, ship it out. A month later, the other guy comes back on and goes, oh, it wasn't ready. And he pulls it back, pulls it back, pulls it back, pulls it back. So even though they never saw each other, they were driving each other crazy. When we could depersonalize it and talk about it using that as a framework, then they actually managed to figure out a way that they were going to work together. So that's the value that I find in this, is it tends to depersonalize it. It gives people a language that allows them to have conversations around very personal reactions to things without taking it personally.
Yeah, because that seems to me one of the major hurdles in a lot of media.
Absolutely.
Major hurdles.
Absolutely, and that's why I mean, since I came across this, by the way, this comes from a book called Dealing with People You Can't Stand. And it's written by two psychologists, Rick Brinkman and Rick Kirshner. And what I love about the book is it's focused not so much on how you're going to change the person in the other, because that's not going to happen. It's how can I dance differently with them so that I encourage them to be different with me. And each of those behaviors in that circle, the tank, the sniper, the know-it-all, and so on, each of those behaviors has a chapter. When I read this thing, I was on a plane going to a mediation, and it blew my world apart because of the power of giving people a mechanism to talk about undiscussable things. And that's where I see the value in it.
That's another major part.
Yeah.
The attack part on one level, the undiscussable issues on another level.
Yeah.
And sometimes people can't
Absolutely.
do either or,
Yep.
or both simultaneously or step by step.
But I've also found that this normalizes it in the sense that people go, oh, well, yeah, that's me. I mean, that's my reaction. But when you start to go into the negative of what the other people that say, they say, you know what, I hear that all the time. People say I'm heartless, I'm ruthless, I'm arrogant, I'm all that. I don't buy it. It's not me. Well, yeah, it is you when you're in that extreme zone where your intention is in jeopardy. We move there, but our vision of ourselves typically doesn't include that part because we don't write ourselves into the story as the bad guy. So when you put it out there, then it allows people to see what other people are seeing, but to do it in a way that is non-threatening and and less personal. And then they can, once they're aware of it, then it's more likely that they'll have a reasonable conversation about it. So I find I do this as trainings before I go into large group sessions along with a number of other things. And what I've found is the group will then actually start to self-regulate. So I had a senior manager who was very much a get-it-done person. We actually did the DISC assessment and plotted his entire team. So he's in that high D quadrant. He's way out here, and the rest of his team is all clustered over here. I put that up on the wall with the plot, and everybody in the room went, oh my God, does that ever explain a lot? And literally it did, because he would start in to talk, and people would just close down. Now he actually starts his conversations with his team by saying, okay, so the get it done part of me is going to drive you nuts for a few minutes, but I need to put this out there. And instead of everybody getting angry, now they laugh. So it's opened the door to communication, but it's also made him realize that he is the lone voice in the wilderness on that team as the get it done person. The rest of his team is all very people focused, which he's missing. So as opposed to getting frustrated with them, now he will go to them and say, listen, I have to send this email, and this is what I wrote. What do you think their reaction is going to be? Well, the people-focused folks are going, for God's sake, don't send that out. That's just going to add fuel to the fire. And so they will help him craft something that is then going to become more acceptable to the person and gets the message across, but doesn't add fuel to the fire. So that's where I've found this to be very, very valuable. It's a great tool for building capacity within the group to help them understand why they're having issues. And it's changed the discussions significantly, even with my group of mechanics.
It diffuses the tension.
Absolutely, it diffuses the tension because it normalizes it in so many ways. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I apologize for going slightly over time. And thank you.